Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. There has been a great deal of contention in the nation and my neighborhood this week. I was even accused of being mean. My response, you ask? You might be right. I might be mean. I might even be short and fat. But the question is, am I wrong? A word of warning to folks who are joining us. This is not a safe place for those who are easily offended by having their ideas challenged. This is broadcast number 76. This is another week where we are welcoming yet another first-timer, but a friend and fellow traveler in the defense of the faith, blogger Karen Campbell, a.k.a. She's That Mom. Our topic tonight is patriocentricity and the polygamy craze. That's a big word, patriocentricity. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast, and our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of tonight's webcast if he can get his computer unfrozen.
Oh, the computer's unfrozen. Hey, this is Florida. Nothing stays frozen for very long. Our sponsors tonight, Don, we have a brand new sponsor.
Brand new. Cool.
It's a familiar sponsor. It's familiar to us because they're one of the people who helped make our program happen. It's the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, the law firm we use, and the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience, the Bible Buffet. And also, just to remind you, you can assure your continued access to this program. In order to do so, please go to midwestoutreach.org. Click the yellow donate button and contribute as you feel led. And speaking of contributions, we have our guest tonight. Greetings.
Good evening.
Greetings and salutations. I'm over here playing with my computer and I got lost. It happens to me quite often these days. I don't know why.
It's not just me then.
So, Karen, we have you with us tonight. You have agreed to be the target of the evening, if you will.
Bring it on.
Now, just a little bit of background. You and I met due to a common person of concern, let's say, if I recall, and that would be one Bill Gothard.
Yes, we did. And I think it's been almost 10 years since I interviewed you for a podcast.
Oh, wow.
So it's been a while. So,
well, like Joy often tells me, time flies whether you're having fun or not.
That's right.
Time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. But
oh no, it's just getting too weird for me now. So, and if we have anyone, and we have a few have joined us already. We have a hello from Tara C in Tennessee, actually. So that's fun. We're glad to have her. Okay, so patriarchy. Why in the world are you interested in patriarchy, and how does that tie in? Let's go back a second to Bill Gothard. Why would patriocentricity and Bill Gothard be of an interest to you?
Well, let me give you just a short little portion of our journey, or version of the journey we were on. We are homeschoolers. Our children are all grown now, but we were homeschoolers. We homeschooled through Bill Gothard's ministry, through his homeschool program. And we were involved in the mid-1980s. Then, of course, you come up through the 90s, and a lot of other names besides Bill Gothard started popping up that were having the same kind of influence that we saw him having. Started out innocently enough with fathers leading their families, and there was nothing sinister about it that we saw initially. But, you know, as different groups of people jumped on this bandwagon through homeschooling conventions, the convention slots would all be filled by people who promoted what they called patriarchy. They didn't promote what they called dads leading their families. It became patriarchy, and then I coined the phrase patriocentricity, because they taught that everything in the household was to revolve around the father. Every choice that was made revolved around him. There would be nobody in the household who was called to a ministry other than the father. And the goal of all of the children and the wife was to promote the father's ministry.
So, and I take it you have a problem with this.
Well, I did, and I still do, because I think there are still some people that do teach this. And what I saw happening was that people were taking passages of scripture and they were taking narratives, things that described something that had happened in the Old Testament, and turned it into prescriptive living for people. And so, you know, you would hear these stories about girls were never allowed to go anywhere without a parent with them. They were not allowed to go to college because they should be trained only to be homemakers. And I had a daughter, very sharp daughter, who did go to college. And then God had given to us 5 sons. So what do you do? How do you train your sons to be godly young men and train them to respect women, but not have this attitude that everything revolved around them?
Right. Well, and there's an additional problem that you're kind of moving toward, because we've had to deal with Bill Gothard and his teachings, which is also patriocentric. And I've had phone calls from counselors, for example, in other states. One of them was a woman they were counseling that was 43 years old, had been raised in this environment, had been homeschooled, nothing beyond that, not allowed any outside jobs at all, because only in the home, women cannot work outside of the home, until her parents passed away. And here she is, 43 years old, with no marketable skill, no training, no education beyond what she got as a homeschooler at home. And where do you even begin with that at 43 years old? That's a very difficult place to be. And they're not consistent. As you know, we've written some articles on this because of Vision Forum, for example. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a little interested in what they want to call biblical patriarchy. And for those who are tuning in, we are moving to the question of polygamy, because this all does actually tie in. But they claim they are practicing biblical patriarchy, but is that really the case? We have the first example where it's defined occurs in Genesis as Isaac is laying on his deathbed. In Genesis 27:29, he tells he has been tricked, and he tells Jacob to let people serve you, nations bow down to you, be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. And so this is the blessing that's being passed on. Esau's blessing is being passed on to Jacob. He's basically making him the owner of the family. Mother, father, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, all of the family now belongs to Jacob. And then in 27:37, Isaac answers Esau, who's desperate. You've given away my blessing. Do you have anything left for me? And he says in 27:37, behold, I have made him, that would be Isaac, that would be Jacob. Behold, I have made him Lord over you, and all his brothers I have given to him for servants, and with grain and wine I have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son? There's nothing left. He's now the owner of the family. He owns you, brothers, sisters, all of the sheep and the herds and the flocks and everything is all his property. And this is then reaffirmed 3 verses later, 27:40, where he says, by your sword you shall live, he's telling Esau, and you shall serve your brother. So it's all pretty clear. Biblical patriarchy is a ruler or an owner of the entire family. Is that what is being advocated?
I think so. It's interesting one day a friend of mine gave me a call and she said, I have a stack of old Patriarchy magazines. That was the name of the magazine. And it was published in the 80s and 90s. She said, would you like this? Because I'm going to throw them away. They're in my garage. And of course, I couldn't turn that down. And I said, sure, I'd love to see that. So she brought me this probably 2-foot tall stack of magazines. And I thumbed through them. And the interesting thing was that they were not nearly as weird and off base as what I had looked at 10, 15 years later. There was a lot of sound Bible teaching in those magazines, talking about laying down your life for your wife. The wife was so revered in those articles. And the attitude towards children was helping them to be raised to, honor other people. There was a real one anothering edge to a lot of the things I read. How did we get from that place where people were just trying to challenge, and I think it was on the coattails of maybe James Dobson and Focus on the Family, where he talked about, for the first time that I had heard, I was just a young parent with preschoolers when he came out with his radio program, challenging you to take seriously your calling as a parent. And from that to patriarchy, where it had upped its game, to what I was seeing called patriocentricity, where everything revolved around the dad. And I think that there was a progression. And when we started seeing that, it was about around the time of Y2K. So there's a lot of panic. I think, do you need to? Okay. Anyway, I think that, is that better?
Oh, I didn't know you could see the message. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, what we were seeing was that there was this progression of more and more power and authority given to the father. And then you started getting really intense things taught by people like Doug Wilson and the Bailey brothers. Their views of sexuality were frightening for women.
Tell us about Doug Wilson and the Bailey brothers. I would like to hear all about them. I'm kind of a person who doesn't quite get. I'm Reformed, and you may know that Doug Wilson, I think, is the co-founder or founder of the Confederation of Reformed Evangelical Churches, the CREC. Mm-hmm. Which has become a kind of a refugee denomination for churches that were run out of their own Reformed denominations because of a, I'm going to call it heretical set of views known as the Federal Vision. Mm-hmm. I call it heretical because I think it is, but
I agree.
At the very least, it's non-confessional. In other words, all of the NAPARC, the National Association of Presbyterian and Reformed Churches, that's a group called NAPARC. I believe every single one of them now have gone on record opposing the Federal Vision and saying that this is not Reformed theology. So what happens is when churches find out that they're no longer welcome, many of them flee to the CREC, which Doug Wilson set up.
We call it the membership laundering. It's like money laundering. If you want your Presbyterian membership laundered, that's what you do.
Yeah. So, Wilson, the amount of celebrity he enjoys has always been kind of baffling to me because I do not consider him an honest theological broker. I do not. And I've confronted him about my disagreements on a Reformed blog, and he challenged me to go up to Moscow, Idaho, and have a debate with him. And then he implied that I was cowardly, or I was breaking from the Reformation tradition because I refused to do it. And I just said, hey, anything you can't respond to in writing, you should maybe you're the one who has the problem. Maybe if you can't deal with this simply, here online, then maybe it's not my problem, it's yours. But that's history.
Isn't Moscow kind of like the perfect place for him to live anyway?
Yeah, it's kind of, it's, you got the Church of the Aryan Nation as your neighbors, So tell me about his views on patriarchy, and the Bailey brothers while you're at it, because I hear they're buddies.
I think they are very good buddies now. I'm a little bit more familiar, I suppose. Well, I'm familiar with both of them, all of them, but I guess the books that Doug Wilson has written, and I have several of them, I keep them for reference because he's been so popular. I'm also Reformed, and so a lot of homeschooling Reformed people love his books. Reforming Marriage, his views of courtship, his views of fathers being involved in the middle of everything, but women really not having any officially input into the church. I suppose, you always have input with your husband at home, but that's where they would draw the line. The Baileys' views of sexuality, some of the things that they have used, I don't even want to repeat some of the phrases that they have used to describe how men are to. I think they described women are supposed to be on their wedding night terrified, delightfully terrified, or a phrase like that. That's real appealing, They do not allow women to interact with them on their blogs because women are so far down in the ability to converse with them. And if a woman comes on to their website or their blog and she does not have the same view that they have, if they're coming on as sycophants to them, they're welcomed. But a woman who just comes on and challenges it, she is told that her husband will be called her elder, her pastor, because they want to have discipline on you for challenging men. And that
would get a very entertaining response from my PCA church. Let me tell you.
Well, this is the thing. I just, you understand why they fled the PCA, because they don't fit. And Doug Wilson, he wouldn't fit anywhere unless it was his own denomination. He has such strange views.
Yeah. You kind of wonder why we don't hear a lot of talk about biblical careers like sheep herding, and we can think of so many different ways to model ourselves after. And one of the problems that I have is that if you read the Old Testament and the New Testament, by the way, let's have a biblical marriage. A biblical marriage, when Jesus said, in my Father's house there are many mansions, or many dwelling places, many rooms, and I go to prepare a place for you. What he was alluding to was the contemporary Jewish practice of the father of the groom adding a room to his house into which the married couple would move when they were married. So in other words, the Bible says you leave father and mother and you cleave to your wife. Well, that didn't mean you had a separate domicile. That meant what you did was you moved into the house. And you can go all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When Isaac brings Rebekah, where does he move? He moves into a tent right next to his right with his family. He doesn't move away. So would they also advocate that the bride and groom should move into the home of the father?
Well, I do know that some of the people that are seeing themselves as leaders in the patriarchy movement at this time, and I'm not sure they would own that. I think a lot changed after the fall of Doug Phillips. People have been more maybe under wraps with their views on patriarchy publicly. But I know that there was one situation we know of, a church we were involved with, looking for a pastor. And the pastor said he would be willing to move here to pastor a church. but he had to have jobs for all of his grown sons who were married and had families because they all had to move together.
Wow.
So,
interesting. So, you know, all these women who go out and purchase their own real estate and plant vineyards and dress themselves, and she
Proverbs 31 woman there, right?
She sells her own merchandise.
I'd like to just note something on the side there as you get asking these questions. Did you ever think about, it doesn't tell us if her husband even has a job.
Really, you know, for all we know, yeah. And, you know, that would make sense too, especially since we're also going to talk about polygamy tonight, right? We are. What do you need a job for if you got all these women working? So, you know.
Well, there is that. Hey, maybe there's something to this.
Well, hey, we should look. Let's not dismiss this out of hand, right? You know.
Here's one of the interesting things that I observed through the years that we kept touching into patriarchy, whether it was through church, family integrated church movement. That's another aspect of this. That's a big part of where patriarchy is promoted. And one thing that I came to realize, that the patriarchy movement is a woman pushed, a woman directed, a woman driven movement.
Oh, that makes total sense to me. In my years of ministry, you know, I was a minister in a church for 3 years. It was not a Reformed church. And I have had a lot of counseling experience. And one of the common complaints is, let me not call it a complaint. Let me call it one of the common phenomena is women who order their husbands to take charge.
Right.
Yes.
Women who insist and tell their husbands, I command you to take charge of this family.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that happened, and I think it happened a little bit with Bill Gothard. We saw that he would set up this standard, this icon for what a godly family would look like and what a man would look like. And so he would paint this vision for the moms. When you go to a homeschool conference and you're in the University of Tennessee auditorium with how many tens of thousands of people, and he paints this vision for what men are supposed to be like. And then you have Doug Phillips, and he comes along, and women were just so drawn to him. He's very charismatic. I don't know if you ever heard Doug Phillips speak. And he would have this vision so that you would hear moms. You know, I'd be in the children's room changing a diaper in the ladies' restroom, and you'd hear these moms talking, and they would lament that their husbands weren't doing certain things. I remember when R.C. Sproul Jr. and Doug Phillips would team up together and have these different things they would do. Every day they had a blog where they wrote about what they were doing with their families. And you would hear men say, I've got to go and see what R.C. says he's doing today, so I can kind of know what I should be doing with my kids. They drew people to them and painted a vision. And there was a lot of discontent with the women.
And you know, these guys have turned out to be just the rock model of stability in their lives, haven't they? They've just
word.
They've just been such a shining example of morality and how to treat women and all that. And we're not talking about just Doug Phillips, but we're also talking about R.C. Jr., unfortunately.
And Bill Gothard. And
now,
yes.
You know, I think especially all men, especially in this day when we all seem to have targets on our backs right now, we all need to be cautious of how we criticize other men. You know, lust is a common problem, and apparently harassment is a much more common problem than we thought. But these were men who kind of held them. This is what gets me about Gothard, Phillips, Sproul Jr., is that they held up their way of doing things as kind of like the panacea or the way of avoiding moral problems.
Right.
And they ended up in moral problems. So obviously they were selling a very bad bill of goods. They were obviously selling us phony ideas. Benjamin writes that Piper seemed to endorse Doug Wilson is not a heretic. Yeah, that got Piper in some hot water, Benjamin, and Piper has been even in more hot water since on other issues among Reformed Christians.
Well, let's talk about Piper for a second. I don't know if you happened to see the video that he put out a few years ago. It's a story of the young couple. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Are you talking about the one where he says she might have to be slapped around a bit?
No.
Oh, okay.
there's that. But this was a young couple. Now, this to me just explains so much of this whole movement. He had a young couple where they were dating in college. They were not engaged yet. The young man was injured in a car accident, left a quadriplegic, and this girl moved in with his parents to help care for him. He could not speak. It took a long time before he could even blink to relate to her. Finally, after she had been there for months, maybe even more than a year, caring for him, his father said, you need to either decide if you're going to stay with him or you're going to leave, because this is going to be bad. You're going to have to decide. And she said, I'm going to stay with him. So they decided they were going to get married. This young man, who could not hardly communicate at all, they had read through a book that Piper had written on marriage, decided that they were going to follow these principles. Now, you've got to understand, this young man could not communicate hardly at all. You don't even know how much he knew that was going on when they got engaged. They got married, they videotaped it, and then Piper used this as a promotional for his book to show how this young man, even though he was a quadriplegic and people were doing everything for him, he was actually the leader in their household and she was submitting to him. And he flipped their whole real life story absolutely upside down.
He being Piper, you mean?
Yes.
Piper did, yeah.
That's do you know what did you see that?
Well, but did he so he has a video where he says they did the right thing, basically.
Yes, he is promoting their story.
Well,
but it's not really their story. It's just
it's their story, but as they really believe
a creative version of their story.
Yes, and I think this poor young couple believe that this man who is hardly able to communicate is the leader in their home.
Well, has he gained any ability like Stephen Hawking's is really not
much,
but with technology?
Not much.
Okay.
I don't think so. Yeah. The last thing that I saw was maybe 6 months ago, and it was just not much better.
Well, we're gonna start moving in. Now that we've kind of touched on patriarchy or patriocentricity, what it is, some of the big names moving in that direction, and some of the impacts it has had on families. What does it do with the question of polygamy? That seems to be a newer craze. In fact, I was looking at one of the websites today that's put together by Don Milton, who has a book out called Prince of Sumba. I love that, Prince of Sumba, Husband to Many Wives, where he presents this Christian polygamy, he calls it. And in one of the pages, I don't know, Ron, if you had a chance to look at this yet, on one of the pages, yeah, he tells you how to take multiple wives and do it legally. Is that you marry one legally in a civil marriage, and then you divorce her civilly, but you remain married biblically because you didn't give her a written letter of divorcement. And then you marry legally the next wife, duplicate the process, divorce her civilly, but stay married biblically. Now you have two wives because you haven't given them a biblical certificate of divorce. Now that could save, potentially, if you do that enough times and you kind of keep them, but don't give them a certificate of divorce, it could save you child support and that kind of thing, which, in polygamy, that could be difficult.
But shouldn't all marriages end civilly? Really, you should always be civil if you're going to have a divorce, right?
Yeah, well, that's true.
You said, okay. Well, then my timing was off there.
It was off there, but I think we have a sponsor tonight, don't we?
Well, yeah, this is a problem that is becoming really widespread among the polygamous community, and we hope to address it. Did your polygamous marriage end badly? Do all your alimony payments make it hard for you to make ends meet? Well, then the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe is here to help. We'll make sure you get what's coming to you after we deduct our reasonable fees. Find us online or following any given ambulance at Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, the law firm we use. So,
following any ambulance. I like that.
I like it too.
When you have to find somebody, and it's good to know where to look. I'm just going to show my hand in terms of.
I will too. Here's mine. See,
there's my hand here. Both of them. I'm what they call a complementarian, but I don't really abide by everything that flies under that banner necessarily, like all the opinions of. Well, especially when you get into cultural issues, okay, like should a woman work outside of the home? There are some complementarians who I totally disagree with on that score. Or whether it's improper for maybe a woman to maybe even earn more than her husband. If I'm not mistaken, John Piper and I might disagree on a lot of these points. But now we're getting into polygamy, and imagine now, is there a connection? What is the connection, if there is one, between the patriarchy movement and the polygamy movement? Is there a connection?
This is where I think there is a connection. And I've been saying for probably the last 8 years or so that this is going to end up with polygamy being a thing. And I'll tell you why, for a couple of reasons. First of all, our legal environment right now, thanks to the Supreme Court, marriage is not just a man and a woman. So why can't it be 3 wives and your dog? You can set up whatever you want to.
Yeah.
So we're all set for that legally. It doesn't matter. But here's what I think has happened. In the 1960s, late 60s, or maybe mid 60s, a woman by the name of Helen Andelin wrote a book called Fascinating Womanhood. Helen Andelin is a Mormon, and her theology is sprinkled throughout the whole book. From the 60s on up through the 70s, 80s, 90s, church basements all around the country hosted women. Didn't matter what church denomination you were, women would come in and they learned how to be fascinating wives, fascinating women. If you read that book, which is to me, and I am by no means a feminist, it is appalling. She has different things that she recommends. One of them is when you're choosing clothing, men like women to dress like little girls. So you need to go to the little girls department and see what styles they have so that you can do that. Oh, I wish I were. And another point that they make
what kind of men does she hang out with?
Well, see, that's scary, isn't it? The other thing that they need to be like children is they need to be pouty. And so, a husband likes you when you pout, I guess. My husband would not like that. But there's a whole list of things in this book that they tell you if you want to be a fascinating woman, fascinating to your husband, you need to do these things.
Do you remember Maribel Morgan?
I was just thinking that.
Oh yeah, my best story of reading The Total Woman was I read it when I was in labor with my first child.
Oh no!
Talk about disillusionment.
So the saran wrap thing didn't work for you.
Didn't work real well for me. But anyway,
I could never get my wife to do the saran wrap at the door thing.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I had a boss who actually visited her home, met her and her husband, and he found her a very funny and interesting person. But it's like the way I do things. My personality is what you should copy. This is the message I'm getting from these kinds of books.
Well, and this is what I think happened when the patriarchy movement started. it was right side by side and entwined with this book, because now a lot of the patriarch wives, if you will, are the ones promoting going back and reading Fascinating Womanhood. And it's been sold recently. Ladies Against Feminism website has promoted that. And now they're about to reprint the book, which I find interesting.
I think in our Christian bookstores, we should have, you know how you have different, of course, Christian bookstores are becoming extinct right now, but maybe
I
Christian.
think they should actually become.
Yes, they should have they should have a new genre. And this is where I might be being unfair when I say this, but this is where I put all the Beth Moore books in the How to Be Like Me genre of books.
I like that. That.
I think that really this is the attraction. I mean, look at Beth Moore. She's attractive. She looks put together. She's not, she's not
funny.
She's not salacious. She's modest, but she's attractive. She's the kind of person you'd like to have in your church. You'd like to, so this is, I can see women trying to pattern themselves after Beth Moore to be like her. And I think that is her main drawing card, in my opinion. What do you think?
I agree with that. And I think the young crowd of moms, like all of those women like Ann Voskamp and Jen Hatmaker, these are the names I hear a lot. I think the reason that they like them is because they don't set up an unrealistic standard. Their favorite phrase, and it's my least favorite phrase, life is messy. And right. it just assumes that we don't have to take responsibility for things because, well, life is messy.
Well, I get a different message from that. I get it. It's not the end of the world if you make a mess. The point is not to make messes. The point is to promote messes or to even really tolerate them for very long. But hey, you don't cry over spilled milk. That's the kind of message I get.
There's a message that alleviates your responsibility.
In their works, like, well, Jen Hatmaker just absolved the entire LGBTQ community. So right, I guess, right. Yeah.
Right. Well, but I was going to say that just my line of thinking here with the Helen Andelin stuff, one of the things that gives you value in your husband's eyes, and one of the videos I just watched today that's on YouTube that they have, it was just put out, I think, last month, talk about what does it mean to be on your husband's pedestal? How can you fall off the pedestal? Okay. And so I think what happens in this, one of them is having a lot of children. The patriarchy movement pushes that. Well, we all know that women are going to get to a certain stage of life where they can't have more children. So if having children is a mark of the godly patriarch, you might need younger women to come in, younger wives.
Well, there's a limited window of time you have to achieve this goal of being this perfect wife, then, it seems.
Yes, and so you may just have to move over for the sister wife that's going to come in and help your husband achieve that greatness. Oh, and I think we are all primed for that. Because
so what did Samuel's mother's husband say to her? Aren't you like 10 wives to me, even though you don't have any children?
Yeah. So I just think that there's a guilt trip that's laid on women. So I think they would maybe be more apt to accept that. I do know that there's some pockets of this already going on. I've had several people send me notes saying, we don't know what to do in our homeschool group. We've got this polygamy situation. These families have come in. We don't know what to do. We don't really want these dads coming and looking at our young daughters thinking, maybe we can cut a deal here. We don't know what to do. And yet there is this message of we've got to accept this because we have to accept people with gay lifestyles, and we have to accept all of these other things in the church. Anything that calls itself transgender, we are duty bound to be loving and kind and accept. So if a polygamous family comes in, we've got to accept them too. And it is biblical because there were polygamists in the Bible, see?
So there was also concubines. What are we going to have concubines?
There you go. Well, who knows?
And there were slaves.
Well,
Should
and,
we have
and,
slaves?
and we have,
Well-
by the way, I'm going to bring this up here because this is important. We've talked about Christian polygamy. In fact, one of the websites seems to hold the view that monogamy is actually, or one wife is actually cultic. But what they need to have the quality tested, good Jesus keeping seal of approval on their view, because but someone would say, well, Jesus never spoke about polygamy. He never condemned it, obviously. And so we have Jesus on our side supporting our view. Is that true, though?
Well, I guess he never said anything about child molestation either, did he? He never.
That will be next. That's my prediction.
And Jesus never came out against that, did he? He never actually said it was wrong to harass women. I don't remember him saying that.
Well, this is the way that the Bible's approached.
It is the way the Bible's approached. Let's only emphasize the thing Jesus emphasized. He never emphasized genocide. So let's not get too hard on Hitler and all those genocidists.
Right. And he never talked about transgenderism. He never mentioned that was.
And here's the other thing, is that there's this big emphasis on top-down church authority now to the absolute max. And so what if your church leaders embrace some of this stuff? You're not supposed to question it.
Well, that's the fortunate thing in the United States is we have a market for churches. We can go someplace else. But if you're really in a very authoritarian group and you have succumbed to its teaching about authority, you're going to have a hard time leaving. It's people are going to ask you, why didn't you just leave later? And they just won't understand how difficult it was.
Right, and in fact, you Ron, have had some personal experience with the group that
quite a bit.
Were in.
Yes.
When you left, and he would go to leaders of the churches that you went to try to get you kind of kicked back because you were, quote, under discipline, end quote.
Yeah, even though, ironically, he was excommunicated from a church, from a well-known church in the Chicago area, but that was okay. If you were under discipline in his group, then no one had a right to talk to you until they sent you back to his church. Fortunately for me, there were Christian leaders and ministers who stood up to him and just wouldn't take his nonsense.
I had a lot of fun doing that myself. So let's go back. Patriarchy and polygamy, so we don't get too lost here before we run out of time.
Well, polygamy. Go ahead.
Polygamy, yeah. As we have, as I mentioned, this Pastor Don Milton, which you had directed me to, in his book Prince of Sumba, Husband to Many Wives, where he wrote a novel to kind of lay out what Christian polygamy would look like and how it works. And as I have mentioned to Ron in the time past,
say it again, Don. I
love it. Theology from a novel, you just have novel theology.
Yes, novel theology. This is a great. I was reading. I was getting a real kick out of some of the really goofy stuff on those websites. Boy, what people will say when they don't read the Bible. They actually have the nerve to say what the Bible doesn't say. They'll say the Bible doesn't say this. The Bible never says one man, one woman. Never says it. Never. Oh, well, the funny thing is, if you read Greek, it actually does. Those two passages, one in 1 Timothy and the other in Titus, where it says that an elder must be above reproach. In Titus, it says above reproach. And the very next thing after above reproach is the husband of one wife. Do you know how that reads literally in Greek? A one-woman man.
One woman. I like that.
Yes, gynaikos aner. That's how it reads in Titus. The same exact phrase with a different declension of the word man is used in 1 Timothy 3:12. Mias gynaikos andres. It's just a different form of the same noun. It's used a little differently in the sentence, but it's the same Same exact phrase in Greek in both cases. One woman man. Gynaikos is an adjective being used as it's being used as an adjective. It means woman, but it's being used adjectively. So one woman man. So one man, one woman. That is the standard for Christian leadership, and it's mentioned in. It's interesting. It comes in Titus right after above reproach, as if to imply that you're not above reproach if you're not a one-woman man or one-woman man, a man who has only one woman or one wife. They didn't have separate words for wife, woman, husband, man. They used the same word interchangeably. So whenever you talked about somebody's husband, you're really saying her man. When you talked about someone's wife, you were talking about his woman. So it was even embedded in the language. The only way you would have a different understanding was if, his other woman. If he was a polygamist, you would also have that. Said when he talked about divorce, it was not so from the beginning. He seemed to think that the way it was in the beginning was designed to be prototypical of the way it should be. Well, how was it from the beginning? Was it Adam and Eve and Louise and Doris and, Rashonda and whoever? No, it was Adam and Eve, as others would say, not Adam and Steve, but neither was it Adam and Eve and Eva and
Lilibeth and all the others, right? Yeah. Yep. One man, one woman from the beginning, and that, oddly enough, that is what Jesus also affirmed.
Well, I was quoting Jesus when I said that, by the way.
Okay, right. Yeah. Yep. So, how much is this polygamy type stuff growing?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm hearing more rumblings of this, if you will. And I don't know if it's that people feel more empowered because of what the law has stated. I don't know. My experience is working in pro-life things is that if it's legal, then it's moral. That's what people think.
If it's legal and it's moral. We are going to have, as a nation, we're going to be coming to grips with polygamy as well. And this is not just a Christian issue per se.
I agree.
But Islam obviously practices polygamy, and it is written into their sacred texts that it ought to be practiced. I believe it's up to 4 wives or something like that.
3. Maximum 3. I believe it's the maximum 3.
Maximum of 3. Okay, I had heard 4, but
unless they could take 3 in addition to their first wife, but I thought it was 3.
Yeah. Now I believe it's a maximum of 4, 3 in addition to your first wife. But you have to treat them all equally, and so there's all sorts of requirements about how that would work. And so I think nationally we are going to be coming to grips with that fairly soon. I agree with you, by the way, on pedophilia. I think that, in fact, I just posted an article yesterday on a guy who started something called Safe Schools, be promoting pedophilia. In order to have schools be safe, you should have pedophilia, so that you could have an adult guiding them through the learning how to be sexual. Okay.
No comment there.
I think that this is going to, they've painted themselves into a corner, because what if you're just made that way? What if you were just born a pedophile? How can we say that that's wrong?
Well, we were all born sinners, but that's a different discussion. What if we were born, I don't know, white supremacists? Maybe that should be okay too. Well,
and that you bring an interesting thing, because that's another issue that is woven amongst all of this. Is the Doug Wilson, for example, big proponent of the South. The South was right. This,
he has come out against kinism, however, as I understand it. which kinism was kind of it is an attempt to bring racism back under a Christian theological banner.
And you list, they have, I knew a kinist person, and I was surprised at how they use the scriptures.
Kinists are basically just they're highly deficient. They need to become Christians, is what it is. They need to accept Christ as their savior. The more kinists talk, the more I believe they are not Christians. That's been my experience.
But they use the Bible, and so this is important because we have a sponsor that kind of speaks to this issue.
This is true.
That we want to hear from right now, and that is using the Bible and using it in a way that is helpful to you.
Yeah, the way you like it, the way that's comfortable. That's what we are going by these days. Are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take the whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to try the Bible Buffet. At the Bible Buffet, everything is set up and designed around your comfort. Everything is gluten-free, trans fat-free, truth claim-free. At the Bible Buffet, you can find a meal for every appetite and ideas for every state of mind. This week's regular Sunday specials include Aryan appetizers, Sibelian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, and Pelagian pie. Don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. The Bible Buffet, it's not your father's worship experience. And
so there you can pick and choose and put it together in any sort of a biblical meal that you want if you just go to the Bible Buffet.
I've never met a more hateful, spiteful, vicious group of people than kinists. Never. I will say this. I'm going on the record. Kinists, if you run into them, you will find out pretty quickly they are doing it, and they do it is they're kind of like the Noam Chomskys of racism. They're doing it for the benefit of the black man. They're doing it for the benefit. He's being abused by being told he's equal. That's abuse. That's racism. They define racism as telling African Americans that they're equal when they're really not. You understand why that's problematic, don't you? This is kinism. It's a despicable, awful, evil thing. If it ever gets into the church, we are in such big trouble. These people need to be excommunicated immediately and shunned. That is how bad they are. I've talked to them. I've communicated with them. They're incorrigible.
Now, Ron, I'm really concerned that you're holding back on this.
I think I need to be more expressive here. So
you need to do a whole entire segment on that topic.
The thing is, they've kind of gone underground. They rear their ugly. When people like Doug Wilson and R.C. Sproul Jr. are shooting at you, you're really over the top. R.C. Sproul, I think Sproul Jr., as much as I have problems with his past theological positions, I'm not sure what his present ones are, and a lot of his behavior, especially the behavior that got him defrocked from his previous denomination. Basically, he was committing spiritual abuse in the church.
I agree.
Where he was pastoring in Virginia. As much as I say this guy is carrying some major baggage, I gave him credit for calling the kinists skinists. In other words, they base their theology around the color of people's skins. And I think he was the one who invented that moniker, and I think it was a good one. He was right about that. But we're not talking about that. This is the kind of thing that you don't even find in the Bible, but you do find polygamy in the Bible. And so we also find a story, for instance, of what a man did. He was traveling through Israel, and he came to a city in the region of Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, stayed for the night, and had something happen to him that was very similar to what happened to Lot and his family in Sodom, when the angels visited him, and these men gathered around, and they were demanding to have sex with the visitor, and he offered them his concubine, and so the concubine eventually gets raped, and she's found dead on the doorstep the next morning. And what does he do? He cuts up pieces of her body as a message and sends it to all the other tribes. So I'm thinking, if we're going to take this idea of what is found in the Bible is a pattern for our behavior today, are we saying that, first of all, men should have concubines? Secondly, that when they're about to be homosexually assaulted, they should offer the concubine to their to the people attackers. And then when they have finished using his concubine and basically have killed her, is the next thing we should do, in other words, is description prescription? Are we prescribed to do what is described in Scripture?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
I think is just central to so much of what goes on in the whole way the patriarchy movement has been pushed forward.
Yeah, is there, and don't we find different? I mean, it would be absurd to think that going from about 1400 BC at the time of the Exodus, or 2000 BC at the time that Abraham was born, and we fast forward all the way to AD 100 or AD 33, or the end of the New Testament around AD 100. AD 96, it would be absurd to think that we don't see many different cultural approaches to how to organize a family, how to, granted, they all tended to emphasize male headship, but this did not always lead to very rigid categories of this is what women always do, this is what men always do. There were cultural differences all during that 2,000-year period. Cultures change, and now we're in a different culture. And the irony here is, guess what? Polygamy, whether you're able to practice polygamy, a lot of times depends upon your economic status. You have to have enough money to support 3 wives.
You do, and there's something else that occurs to me as we're discussing this.
So who is best able to support 3, to have a polygamous arrangement now? It's men whose women work outside the home. That's where it's going to be most economically feasible. But go ahead.
Or because the women are considered single, since you can only legally marry one woman, they can get on state welfare. Some of the Mormon groups do that, and that's how they finance their lifestyles. But a couple things seem to surface in my thinking here as we're talking about patriarchy, polygamy, and kind of just the area of cults and false teachers. Is there's 2 things that it seems to me that drives these to varying degrees. One is the drive for power. I think that's where patriarchy comes into play, because if you give yourself the position of power, everyone is subservient to you, then you are the boss. God speaks to you, you speak to everybody else, they have to listen to you, or God will get you. The other is sex. Seems to be a big driving force. We see that in the early days of the Mormon Church, for example, up until the turn of the century, that was the case. The Shakers, oddly enough, is a reverse problem. They would do all the shaking stuff to get rid of their sexual energies. The problem with that is they didn't grow the group because they didn't have any kids. So they make great furniture, and now you can't get it anymore because there's no more Shakers around.
So if you shake it, baby, twist and shout too much, you're not going to want to have sex?
You don't, right, because you work out all the energies, you don't reproduce. Or you have the Oneida community that was around about the same time, that they had complex marriage, where the whole group was all married to each other. So sex comes into play in many of these groups in some strange ways, but it is the driving force of what keeps them together for some reason.
Yeah. Karen, you have any comments?
No, I just think it's good that you guys have provided a forum to even discuss this, because I'll tell you, there have been many times when my husband and I have one of us has made this comment about polygamy being on the horizon, and we're looked at like we have 5 heads. But I just know that this is what's coming.
Well, they looked at us as though we had 5 heads when we said gay marriage was coming.
Oh, I know. Or pedophilia. I've had people really challenge that.
When we said gay marriage was coming back in the 80s, they not only laughed at us, they accused us of being alarmists and were just trying to keep gays down. Of course, they don't want that kind of thing. You're just trying to scare us because you don't want them to have equality. And now and there was already talk, Don, you had an article from some minister in the Netherlands back in the 90s, I remember, where he was pushing for pedophilia. You already had the National Man-Boy, or was it the North American?
North American Man-Boy Love Association.
Love Association. That goes back to what, the 60s or something?
Yes, it does, yeah.
So
I remember I graduated from college in 1974. In the spring of 1972, I was in an abnormal psych class, and our professor brought in a street gang from Chicago to address the class, and he brought in a group of guys who were gay. And these were all brought in under the heading of abnormal psychology. And 1 year later, 1973, the American Psychiatric Association decided this was all normal.
And also I remember Johnny Carson show, the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. He had a gay couple on his show, and it was very deliberate. It was it was an agenda item that Hollywood had, the acceptance of gays. I remember during, as he introduced them, I forget whether this was like right after his monologue or if it was as he introduced the couple, he said that a survey had been taken of what parents least want their children to become. And of course, on this list with things like murderers, rapists, and homosexual was on the list. And he remarked, can you believe that there were more parents who did not want their children to be homosexuals than did not want them to be murderers? And now, okay, that may have been a survey. Was it scientific? I don't know. I don't remember. I didn't look into it. Could there be other surveys that refute that? Hey, it happens all the time. But you could tell they were pushing this agenda that society needs to change in its attitude toward gays. And this agenda item has largely been fulfilled. So what's the next one? Well,
I think pedophilia, perhaps.
I don't think Harvey Weinstein's having his agenda items fulfilled right now.
No, but is this not the most just schizophrenic culture when you listen to this? You don't know. Why is it acceptable and it's not acceptable for other people? I don't understand the rules.
Well, it's okay as long as you don't force people.
That's because there really aren't any rules. They just make up as they go away. And that is the problem. We're going to have to start winding down here. But that ultimately is the problem. When we had the Judeo-Christian ethos, morality, even though most of the nation weren't Jews or Christians, we all had the Judeo-Christian morality we subscribed to. There was at least something that we could say, okay, this is wrong and this is right. Now, that didn't mean you didn't behave badly. Obviously, they did. You had children out of wedlock. You still had homosexuals carrying on their activities, just not so much publicly. You had kind of the advent of Playboy magazine, which you could buy if you went into the store, and it was under the counter in a brown paper bag. And now everything's just out there right at the front by the candy counter. It's unbelievable. Why? Because they've worked diligently over the century to move away from a Judeo-Christian morality. Ron and I talk about this a lot, and I've written on it extensively, is we went from having a Judeo-Christian morality to simply having a hangover of Christian morality in the 60s and 70s. In the 1980s, the hangover wore off. and all bets are off.
Well, it's I think it's still in the process of wearing off. We have, but mostly the it's so faded you can barely see it. Francis Schaeffer called it living on borrowed capital, right. And really he traced it all the way back to the American Revolution, where three of our people are really upset about the idea of having a Mormon president. Well, three of our earliest presidents were Unitarians.
Right.
John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and John Quincy Adams were Unitarians, and the theological orthodoxy of most of the other presidents all the way through Lincoln was questionable at best. In fact, there really is no indication that Lincoln was a president. Lincoln was a conservative Christian of any kind. He was probably a kind of a free thinker kind of person. You say this stuff to people today and they're just appalled. They're shocked, but that's the truth. We've been living in the shadow of the Enlightenment, including our leadership now, and it's really amazing how long what I call it borrowed capital, you called it what again? The hangover?
Christian hangover. Yeah.
It's really amazing how long the hangover has lasted. It's a testimony to the Holy Spirit's power in preserving a culture in spite of itself, a culture that wants to commit theological suicide and hence cultural suicide. So
yeah.
Well, and I believe there is a remnant of true godly people who want to obey Scripture. They want to share their faith. I see these people. I know these people. I feel sometimes as a woman, I'm fighting from both directions because I'm not a feminist. I wouldn't be caught dead marching in Washington, D.C. with those women who were marching. At the same time, I feel like the church still is marginalizing women to a certain extent. If you're conservative, what if you're conservative and you're pro-life, but what pro-life denomination is going to welcome a lot of involvement by a woman in leadership? That's hard.
Well, yeah. that is a problem. I have, as you know, we're not a church. We're a para-church ministry. And so we don't have to take positions on a lot of things that local churches do have to. And we have women who work in our ministry and they teach and all sorts of things. We don't really seem to have that kind of an issue because our concept is my task is to serve you to the best of my ability. And we all kind of focus on trying to outserve each other. So the whole question of who's the boss doesn't even really factor in anymore because it's a matter of who's best at what and let's go do that. But as I've had discussions with them, I find, a couple of them are single and they go, it's really hard for us to serve in church. There's no place for us because we're young, we're single, never been married. So the first thing that happens is when we go, many of the married women assume we're there to get their husbands. Or if we're not married and we're not there to get their husbands, then we therefore must be gay. And so there's not a place for us as females to fit in the church. We're not aspiring to be the lead pastor, and we don't even think it's biblical that a woman is the lead pastor. But we do have things to offer the church. We need to be incorporated into the family of the church as somebody who matters in the church, but we're not. That's a different subject in the whole polygamy question, probably.
Well, it's a difficult one. I mean, women definitely have the gift of teaching. Now, I already kind of showed my hand as a complementarian. What that translates into in my denomination of the PCA is that women can't be in church offices. How do you negotiate the issue of a woman then who has teaching ability and perhaps is competent to teach adults, and perhaps, a lot of her stuff might actually be useful to men? How do you do that? How do you handle that? And the
Bailey brothers have a solution for that.
Oh, what is their solution? do tell. Well,
Karen. Out there, you're just not even allowed to have a blog. Well, that might be teaching a man in heavens. That cannot happen. Women cannot teach a man anything.
And the sad thing is that these are the sons of Joe Bailey, the former columnist for Eternity magazine, who questioned Bill Gothard, who basically held his feet to the fire. I think Bill Gothard was essentially dishonest with him, and it convinced Joe Bailey that he was more on the right track than he really was. This goes back 40 years, 50, really. Not quite 50, but it goes back over 40 years. Joe Bailey probably would disagree with where his sons have gone. In our church, we have, to be honest, not a lot of women have come forward and said we want to be adult Sunday school teachers, but we do have one group where they take them through Bible studies. As long as it has proper elder oversight, I have no problem with it. One of the most gifted women I know teaches a wonderful class on Christian worldview. Her husband happens to be an elder, and we have other elders sitting in the class. So they're there as oversight for what she's teaching. And really, if there's a problem with it, the buck stops with the elders.
Right, because they're there. So here's a question because we're really over time tonight. Penjamin writes, women in leadership, is that a patriarchy issue for you?
What kind of leadership are you talking about? You could be president of the United States for all I care. I have no problem. We had we have a woman who's Queen of England right now. And back when queens had a lot more power, we had a woman who was Queen of England, Elizabeth I. Is it the norm? Is it the prevailing thing that happens in history? No, but is it a problem? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think it is either, but I do think patriocentricity is a problem. Polygamy is beginning to be a problem. As I point out, there's at least 2 websites. There's more, I'm sure, but 2 that
and dating sites if you're looking for someone.
And dating sites. If
yes,
you're looking
there are
for
polygamous dating sites.
We have a man, and I'm not going to name him, but he's in our area right now, and he was a personal friend of Rousas J. Rushdoony.
Oh, okay.
He was well connected in the theonomy movement. He runs a chain of daycare centers or preschool, places in our area. One's right down the street from me, and his former son-in-law used to attend our church and has told me some pretty hair-raising things about what his father-in-law teaches as the patriarch of the family. He pastors his own church. I said, well, who is in this church? Well, mostly family members. Mm-hmm. And that's fine with him because of his patriarchal views. Well, tell me about some of these patriarchal views. And he says, well, according to him, if any of us offended him, he has the biblical right to take our lives as members of his. This is how far his patriarchy went. If I were to mention his name, many homeschoolers would know who he is. So, and I'm not going to do that because everything I have, I believe the testimony I've received is credible.
But it's second and third hand, right?
But it's second and third hand. So this can be a very dangerous movement. It can lead to, you can imagine somebody who is a little bit even more screwy and having these views, one day taking the life of one or more of his family members because he thinks the Bible tells him to. There's a difference between, as a complementarian, I would draw a distinction between male leadership and male rule. Patriarchy literally means the rule of the father. In Roman culture, a father could legally kill his son as long as the son was a minor. So what this fellow is saying, I don't know where in the Bible he gets the idea that a father could kill a member of his family, but that was a common idea among pagan Romans, however, in their version of patriarchy.
Ron, I'm going to have to send you a link to an article that I wrote that deals with the question, who is the real complementarian? Who is the real patriarch? Because there are such blurred lines. Russell Moore who's, you know, very well known, has made some, what I think are disturbing statements regarding patriarchy. He prefers the use of the word patriarchy.
Really? I don't like that word at all. Russell Moore, the Southern Baptist guy, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I'm surprised. I thought he was a little bit more moderate.
Guys and gals, I have to say we are 16 minutes over time, and I hate to do that. And it's been engaging. We're going to have you back and pick this up again. But we're going to have to wrap it up for tonight. And then
okay, well, let's do that. Let's wrap it up. Let's give credit to where credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Justin Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and The Opposer. Mormon Archives manager is Polygamy. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys is Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Technical assistance comes through Murky Research. And as you know, our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Yvonne Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, responsible for its content, although you will never, ever, ever be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never.
Not once, not even.
All right, Karen, thank you for being with us tonight. Ron, as always, it's been fun and informative.
It's been real and it's been good, and hey, it's been real good.
Thanks a lot. You guys are a riot to hang with. So.
We are glad. We're glad you let us have you, and now you know you've been had.
All right.
All right. Night all.